Hey everybody, okay, here we are for the Education of a Weaponized Man podcast. Tonight we're doing a strategy session. I got Dustin Dodery with me, Coach Dustin with me. Brad is out of town this week, so we won't have Brad joining us. But we're going to have a really great episode. We're going to talk about a couple, things that are really happening right now that are current, I kind of guess, like hot topics. One of which you may not be familiar with. And I wasn't until a couple days ago when somebody sent me a video. And I've done a little bit of research over the last couple of days, and it is absolutely alarming. And everybody needs to hear about this, so we're going to address that tonight. So stay with me. We're going to hit a couple hot topics, and right back. We'll be back in 60 seconds right after the intro.
Many people understand that they can at any time become the target of a violent criminal assault. These same people know that they have a life, family, and property worth defending. Criminals understand that violence is its own language. Violence is not the sport of competition. Violence is not the art of fighting. Violence is about one thing: destruction. There are those who believe that violence, even in self-defense, is morally wrong. Then there are good people like you who know that defending yourself, family, and others, as well as your property, is not only a personal right, but a duty within a civilized society. Understand, violent assaults are won before they occur. People who learn strategy survive. People who do not will not. For those brave people who believe life is precious and worth defending,
welcome to the Education of a Weaponized Man podcast. Okay, all right, we are back, and I said that we're going to jump in and touch on a couple hot topics here tonight. So the first thing that I want to address, and unfortunately at this point in time, we can't go super deep into this because there's just not, the details haven't fully been released yet, but I just wanted to make sure that we touched on this because on April 8th, so a couple weeks ago now, April 8th, a 16-year-old boy was, a 16-year-old young man was attacked outside of his high school while waiting at the bus stop. Karnveer Sahota was the young man's name, and he was attacked and brutally beaten. And it was first reported that he was stabbed. In the beginning, there was not a lot of details out about it. Unfortunately, Karnveer succumbed to his injuries, which now we do know that the cause of death after the autopsy was due to a stab wound in the chest. But from what I'm hearing, again, it's kind of unsubstantiated reports at this point in time. But it was a very, very severe beating, and it doesn't sound like he was just stabbed once in the chest in a kind of a hit and run type thing. It sounded like he was targeted for whatever reason, and it was a very severe. And so he has unfortunately succumbed to his injuries. And the police have announced that they have now charged several individuals. By the sounds of it, all under the age of 18. They had at first, the charges were going to be an attempted murder charge, which they now will have to upgrade because he has now passed away. So I wanted to talk about this, right? Because again, if we had more details, we could address some of the specifics of this type of an assault. But I'll start with one place, and I want to make sure that I'm very clear with my context. And Dustin, I'm sure you've heard of this case and stuff, but they were doing, I think it was the superintendent of the school district was doing the press conference, and he was visibly upset and, had to hold back tears and stuff. And of course, this hits not only Karnveer's family, obviously, it has destroyed their world because we often talk about the ripple effects of violence. And it's important that not only did this young 16-year-old with his entire life ahead of him, this good kid, not involved in drugs, not involved in gangs, all that, a really good kid. Not only did it destroy and take everything, he has or ever going to have, but that ripple effect of violence that we so often talk about is so devastating that his immediate family and friends and the people closest to him, we can all imagine the devastation that is, they are experiencing at this point in time. But, the entire community, that neighborhood, that entire school, whether people were really close to him or knew him or not, that whole ecosystem is being hit. And what I'm getting at is the superintendent was doing a press conference. And the one thing that I cued in on, and again, I want to be clear with my context, is as he was sitting there and talking about it and extending his condolences, he said, really, the only way to describe this is the unimaginable has happened. And I completely get what he's talking about because, and Dustin, you have kids, I have kids. And of course, our kids are just a few years away, our oldest kids, a few years away from being able to drive. Let's say get their learner's permit. And, not many years after, a couple years after, they're going to be out there driving. And I know that as our kids, grow and as they get their driver's license and they begin to drive, that accidents happen, bad things can happen. And, especially to young children in vehicles, lives can be lost. And so I get the context of the unimaginable. But at the same time, I wanted to zero in on that because one of the things that I think we really need to talk about and put a light on is that violence and violence to young kids, violence to young men, violence to women, it's not unimaginable. And as long as it's unimaginable, then we have no solution to that because the way I'm looking at it is an unwillingness to, again, look at the problem or address the problem. And I think I cued in on this. And again, I'm not saying this is what, was his perspective, sole perspective on it, but we have to learn lessons. We have to look at it. We have young kids in our school systems across the world that are turning to suicide due to social aggression, due to bullying. And again, I've always said this, that this is, I don't want to just talk about this as like, this is a problem within our school system. This is a systemic problem within our society. This is a systemic problem within parenting or whatever. However, there's so many different angles of it simply because most times we are not willing to look at the problem. We don't want to turn the lights on and see the toxic, corrosive, septic reality of what is happening physically, mentally, emotionally with our youth today and with our kids, because we as adults don't have answers to those problems. And when the adults don't have answers to the problems, viable answers to problem solutions, then it's easier just to not talk about it. So, here we are, a young 16-year-old kid, his entire life ahead of him. And again, we'll find out more as the details come out about what happened with it. But he becomes the target and ultimately the victim. I don't want to say victim. He becomes the target of a violent assault, and he ends up losing his life. I won't say the word victim because, victim is, I don't want to label him that way, right? You know what I mean? Because that's not how he lived his life, as a victim, and he was targeted, and ultimately his life was taken by young kids committing criminal predatory acts. And so, yes, he was the target of a violent assault, and ultimately it cost him his life. So, I don't know, Dustin, just maybe right off the top, I don't know if you've heard about it or thought about this at all, but is there any visceral thoughts you want to throw in on this subject?
Yeah, I did. I didn't hear as much as you. I did come across an article maybe on Tuesday or something like that. And it was very brief. It had less information than what you even gave, but did indicate that, he was stabbed and that he had passed from his injuries about a week after in the hospital. So yeah, I did hear about it. And obviously, first thing I thought of was my kids, in particular, my son, because he's older, he's closer in age to the young gentleman we're talking about. And yeah, I mean, the visceral response, of course, it doesn't take long, a matter of seconds of putting yourself in that type of situation and imagining that something like that, even not as serious as that, happening to one of your own kids, and the emotions, they don't take long to bubble up to the surface. And that's just imagining what that could be like, right? So I mean, that was the visceral thought. Yeah. The follow-up thoughts to it for me were, obviously our kids have been around, training and weaponizing from birth, so they have that advantage. But at the same time, it's no matter how much they've done, I don't know, maybe you feel the same way as me, but it's kind of like, yeah, but it's not enough. Like I've always had that feeling like, oh yeah, they're so lucky, but at the same time, I wanted them to have so much more than what they have had.
Yeah.
Anyway, you hear about things like this, and it just brings that much more to the forefront. They're like, okay, what have I done? I reflect on that. What do I need to do? How can I take this and use it to sort of move in the right direction for my kids and my life? And, I started to think about, when I have this conversation with my son, because I haven't talked to him about it yet, so he probably hasn't heard about it. It's kind of like, what sort of things do I want to say to him? And it's the same thing I can say to anybody watching this. And it's like, we've talked about it lots, but, Our parents throw us in swimming lessons. Why? Because you might fall in the water and drown. Do you know what I mean? Could be a lake, could be a swimming pool, it could be a hot tub, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Does it happen very often? Thankfully, not super often, but it happens. It could happen. So you take swimming lessons. You know what I mean? So that's the kind of conversation I would have with my son. Like, do you hear about kids getting beaten to this extent very often? No, thank God.
Yeah.
But it happens. Do you know what I mean? So he needs to be aware of that. That has to be in his wheelhouse of things that can happen.
Yeah.
Does he practice fire drills at school? Yeah. Year after year, every year. When's the last time there was a school fire? Like in Canada or anywhere in North America? I think it's like 50, 60, 70 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
But they still do it every year. Why? Right? Because it could. And violence is no different. And so, people who haven't heard those kind of comparisons, to me, that's sort of the quickest, easiest way to sort of have this make sense for someone.
Yeah.
Why these conversations are so important.
Yeah, 100%. And I agree with everything you said. And I think because we don't have a ton of details about the actual assault, so we can't, there's certain elements of this we cannot yet speak to, right? It would be guessing. What I thought would be valuable, because really there's another hot topic I really want to get to, but I want to spend a little bit of time in this. And I thought, how can we add some value to it? And I thought, well, here's what we can talk about, right? What do we know? What are the facts? The facts are that a 16-year-old kid who had no, he was a good kid. He was, a matter of fact, his whole thing was being role model and mentor for other kids. And he was 16. He was a good kid. And he wasn't a small kid. He was 6'2" just turned 16 years old. And the only reason I bring that up is because he wasn't this meek kid. He was a presence, and he was a good kid by all accounts, a role model that, and so I want people to understand that this can happen to even the best of us. As a matter of fact, that's where violence is so destructive, because it doesn't ask for your consent. It doesn't care whether you're a great moral person, whether you mind your own business, whether you know what I mean? It doesn't matter. Violence is about destruction, and we've said that many, many times. But I thought what we can talk about, what we know, is that this young man lost his life, and that he's gone. And that ripple effect of destruction is tearing through his family right now, the community, the school, his friends. It's spreading, right? Now, what I thought is, we as parents, right? How do we respond to this? And I'm asking as in you, me, but also I'm trying to say, if you're listening to this, how do you respond to this? Do you have kids? Are you a parent? Even if you're not a parent, you have to ask, how do you respond to this? Because this is it. And you already touched on some of this, but how do we respond to this? Instantaneously, right away, one of the first things was a conversation. My oldest daughter's 12 and my youngest is 8. But do you shield this from them? You know what I mean? My oldest being in grade 7, this happened at a high school. She doesn't get up and read the paper. She's not on her phone getting news media. Her circle of friends weren't talking about it. But do you shield it from them? And my thing with that is absolutely not. Because one of the things that we do with anybody, adults, anyone that comes into our world, is one of the first things that has to happen is what we call the harsh realities. Is you have to accept the realities of what's happening in this world, what happens in violence. And this is 12 to 16 is not a big jump. And so, of course, with my 12-year-old, we sit down and we have a conversation, and that conversation has some very harsh realities into it. And it's not always a comfortable conversation to have. And I'll just caveat it with this. I also had the conversation with my 8-year-old. Now, is the conversation with my 12-year-old and the conversation with my 8-year-old the same conversation? Clearly it's not. But it's about the same subject matter, and the same harsh realities are there. I just frame it in a slightly different way, because as her parent, right, I understand where she's at. What can she handle? What type of terminology can she handle? I understand her, so I understand how to relate this to her. But I didn't A, hide it from her, and B, I didn't try to relate it to her in a way where there's no impact for her. Where she's like the same way I'd talk to her about her favorite cartoon or something like that. You know what I mean? It's not a happy subject. It is a harsh reality of life. And within the context, for her at her level, me as the parent understanding where she's at, I introduce what has happened to her. Why? Because at 8, and of course, every year they get older, at 8, she is still largely, I'd say probably 99%, 98%, within my defensive strategies, right? I'm solely responsible for her protection. But I understand that at 9, 10, 11, and so on, more and more, she will start to formulate her own, she will need to formulate her own defensive strategies. So it's important that there's an introduction of the realities at the right time in the right way. Naya, of course, already has and the need for, and she has developed her own defensive strategies. But mine, of course, she's still within mine, but hopefully everyone understands this dynamic of what's happening. So I just thought, like with you and what you talked about, like with parents out there, I would encourage you to have a conversation about what happened. Now, I think what's interesting, and this is where we can maybe have a little back and forth on this, is, of course, we can explain the harsh realities. Here's what happened. This is what happened. Then, of course, the questions come, why? Like, why did this happen? And then it comes into, well, what do I do about this? Like, because now that you're sharing with me, there are these horrible things that happen, no matter how rare. Geez, Dad, what would I do? Like, he was waiting for his bus. That's it. He was waiting for his bus. He could have just been walking across the field to go home, which my daughter does all the time. He could have it didn't like, but here he was just out living his life, and all of a sudden, several young men approach him. And then again, we don't know all the details, but clearly they approach him and they assault him. And so it's like, well, what's the next thing with them? And for me, this almost ties back to what we talked about last week a little bit, where I want people to understand that the core of your conversation is, one, make sure that you are not insulating them from the realities of the world that they live in, especially when it comes to their safety. Yes, adjust it to their emotional and mental level. You are their parent. You know better than anybody when and how to frame it for them. But don't hide them from the realities of it when it comes to defensive strategies. But the second part, when it comes to the solutions, I want people to know that the first part of the solution has nothing to do with the combatives. Most people think of this, say, oh, so what you'd need to do is, this is why I got to teach my daughter to fight. And again, we hate the word fight, but that's the way people would frame this. Oh, you're waiting at the bus stop, you're walking home, several individuals show up, they pull out knives, they're threatening you, they violently start to attack you. You need to know how to fight. You're way, way ahead of the game, right? There are so many more things that need to be put in place as part of defensive strategies long before that happens. Right? That is the last resort. And yes, those skills need to be there, and they definitely can't be about fighting, because nobody's going to fight several people at the same time and come out of that okay. I don't care how many stripes you got on your black belt. I don't care how many trophies you have at home. No martial art, no sport works against multiple opponents where their whole goal is to destruction, is to murder you. It's a different thing. So you need different strategies. But let's back up from that. Again, talking with Naya, there's a bunch of this, but I don't want to give an example. I'll give one, Dustin, you can chime in and either expand on it or throw in your own thoughts. But for example, right away, it's like, Naya, this is why when she walks home, like, yes, do you have a communication device? Yes, the phone, great. But the phone's not going to be your first line of defense. That's going to be something secondary, right? But yes, you have the phone. Now, the other side, I'll just touch on the phone real quick. My number is not necessarily the first number that you would want to call, because I might be too far away. Your mom might be too far away. And so there is no, if you need immediate saving or an immediate intervention, the phone is not the best thing. 911 is potentially not the best thing. There's other things that you could call, right? So, but there's the phone. But we talk about mental mapping in the sense that, like, when Naya walks home, we've walked the route. And we say this maybe is your primary route, but what are your other secondary routes? And the reason that's important is because if somebody is following you, maybe it's a group of kids who have it out for you, or it's just some random people up to no good, whatever, but you want your child to understand that they might be walking and they might see 2 blocks ahead, 3 blocks ahead, a block ahead, they might see a group of people hanging out there, and there's a bad energy to that. And where most kids would be like, oh shit, and they would continue to walk because this is how I have to get home, because this is the pattern. Does that kind of make sense? Whereas it's like, if you feel for any reason, if your intuition, your alarm goes off, the messenger of intuition goes off, and you feel anything at all, you understand how to deviate to different routes. Like, what are the different routes? Also, we've identified different houses, different businesses, different things, which are safety zones. If you needed help, where would you go? Home's not the best place because home, threat. But this house right here, we know this house has kids. We know that these people are home during the day. And again, like I'm not now talking in this terms of specifics to Carnvere's situation. I'm talking about what are the conversations you have. There's some harsh realities our kids have to face. There are other kids out there. There's other men out there. Typically, it's men that would do harm to your child. And so the strategies that we have to counter that, we have to go deeper on the stuff that is not connected to the combatives. It's the mindset. It's the perception. It's those things are what weaponizes and what keeps people infinitely safer. And the combatives are when sugar's turned to shit and all hell's broke loose and everything else has failed, which is a lot of bad shit has to happen to get to that point if you've got survival strategies on the front end. So the conversation of mental mapping, understanding different paths home, understanding different numbers that you may need to call that aren't just mom and dad. That's a reactive type situation, all those type of things. So is there anything you want to add to that, Dustin, or something different that's come into your head right away?
Maybe two things that kind of hit me. One is in that same situation you talked about, kid walking home from school, something gives them that uneasy feeling, right? Whether it's a group of kids following them, an adult following them, something feels off. Right away, their SNS is going to start to fire. And so I think it's just important to point out that doing things like what you just talked about, like that mental map of having an alternative route, knowing that like, oh, okay, I feel this, what should I do? When you kind of have those, what we call mission commands that fit mission demands, that can actually help sort of stave off some of that SNS response. So it actually helps them not to panic as much because they know what to do. It's like, oh yeah, I should go home the other way that me and dad talked about. Or yeah, I know so-and-so lives at that house, or I know there's at least a family that lives there. So I don't know them, but better chance with a family than some random person following me. Stuff like that, right? But so I think just having these different strategies in place can definitely help keep their SNS under control. And that's kind of a side note, but I thought it was an important one. And then the other point I was going to make is on the same kind of line, it's just a kid walking home from school. Yeah, you may not know anyone that lives on those alternate routes, but again, it's why we tell people like, let your kids talk to strangers from a very young age. Let them dial in their intuition because they may have to go to a house where they don't know the people. Or do you know what I mean? Or they may have to interact with someone on the walk home. They need to have those strategies and those intuitive feelings as to, does this feel like a safe interaction or an unsafe interaction? Well, if you spent your whole life being told, don't talk to strangers, don't talk to strangers, don't talk to strangers, you have no radar, you have no intuition, right? So I just think that in that situation can also be very applicable and helpful especially for kids and stuff like that.
Oh, 100%. And I'll throw one other thing in on there. Like we've walked that route. Of course, we walk the route with our daughter before she starts walking it alone. And at the times when she does have to walk alone, and we go up to the house. You say, oh, I don't know who lives there. Go ring the doorbell. You're an adult. I have a finely tuned intuition, but so does my daughter. But go up and ring the doorbell. They're outside mowing the lawn. They're outside shoveling in the winter. And we stop and say, hey, we introduce ourselves and say, this is my daughter. She goes to school right here. You'll probably see her on XX days walking home this way most times. And I just thought we'd ask, like I wanted to introduce because if she ever needs help, I just told her that, you know what? She'd probably come. And they're like, oh my God, of course. Well, my name is so-and-so and absolutely and stuff, right? Like, the whole saying of like, it takes a village, right? And it does. And yet we live in a society where, again, most people like don't even know their neighbors anymore. They don't want to talk to their neighbors. And that's the people right next to them, much less I don't want to talk to people that are on the route that my daughter walks because who gives a shit? It's the unimaginable. But the second you stop calling violence or like, again, we safety in the schools in terms of fire drills, look at driving. I was writing an article today for this magazine thing I want to submit, and one of the analogies I used was like, isn't it funny with driving? But my first I remember writing my test for my learner's permit. I studied the book religiously because I couldn't wait to get my learners and I couldn't wait to drive. And I went in and I passed the test with flying colors. It was easy. I studied the book, I wrote the test, and I passed, no problem. Then I remember, like, sitting behind the wheel of my dad's car being like, oh, I'm going to drive. And then I remember going, oh, fuck. I remember being terrified going, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. Like, I read this book, I passed this test. I don't have a clue what I'm doing. And then my dad jumped in the passenger seat. And, I started to kind of relax a little bit. I could feel my face and my hands again. And then what? He in painstaking detail, I might add, started to coach me on how to drive. And the only reason I say this is because isn't it funny that not only does my dad teach me that when he reached a limit, he hired and, I took a driving course and all this stuff. We do all this prep work. Why? Because it is not unimaginable that if you give the keys to your vehicle to a 16-year-old new driver, you not only do you imagine it in great detail, the horrific accident that they could get in, or you imagine the scenario that could take their life. So what do? We coach them. We drive with them. We send them to courses. We do all these different things to help regulate or mitigate that risk. Now, can we get rid of it all? Of course we can't. But we do so much to mitigate it. But violence, bullying, it's the unimaginable. And what do? What we just talked about have the conversation with your kids. You have to introduce them in the right way to the harsh realities of violence, bullying, antisocial, all the stuff that happens, depends on their age. And then you have to start coaching them. You have to coach them on how to be smart. And I think back in the day, this was called, you got to fucking teach your kids to be street smart. And I don't know if that's not a term that we use really, but I like it. Like, mine is I weaponize my kids. That's teaching them to be street smart, be savvy. In this situation where these several youths attacked this young man, I don't know the details. So this is a speculation and I'm only doing it for an example here. But did he see them coming? Probably. Was there a verbal beforehand? Was there posturing? Was there escalation? Probably. Did he run? Did he go, fuck this shit? Like, I seen these guys coming. I got a bad feeling. Drop his book bag and get the fuck out of there. Did he know where? Like, did he run across the street? There's houses. McNally High School, I've been there. There's literally houses straight across the street. Now, again, would he have made it different? I don't know. But what I can say with probably a lot of confidence is, because especially I remember being 16, if you're not coached, I probably wouldn't have run at 16 years old. You would have, because running's not what a man does. And you're 6'2" at 15 years old, just turned 16 years old. I'm a big fucking guy. I can handle that. Like, I don't know the paradigms, but it's the same thing. Like, I'm in a car and I'm driving and another car is driving straight towards me in the same lane head on. Do I hit the fucking gas and go, fuck it, chicken, let's see who moves first? Or do I, what do I do? You got a higher likelihood of doing some sort of evasive, safer driving strategy or tactic because you've been coached. I don't, maybe that's a weaker analogy, I guess, but I just want, again, like right now at the earliest stages of a tragic incident like this, what can we do? Have the conversation and then start the coaching process. Understand that our kids, these are threats. Does my child face this? The reality is, statistically, that my daughters, both my daughters, by the time they're 25, will have faced probably no less than half a dozen situations where an individual known to them, someone that they would call a friend, an associate, a boyfriend maybe even, threatens to sexually or violently assault them. Those are the statistic realities. I can either at 12 and 8 go, there's no weeds, or I can start going, here's the reality. Now, we can either as a society wait for men to change and men to do better, or I can say, I can't control how other people are raising their sons. I can't control how society is stereotyping and depicting women. I can't, yes, we can do things to not try to contribute to it, all this type of stuff. But as that battle's going on, the realities are, you're a target. You are going to be a target. Your young daughter is a higher value target than your son is, but he still is a target in his own way, in his own certain right. You know what I mean? So either we can ignore this stuff, or we can accept the realities of what it is, have the hard conversations, and then start coaching them. And unfortunately, parents that may have had the conversation said, oh my God, did you hear about this boy and this, and it's tragic and this, and that's why I want you to be careful. I need you to be careful coming home. Don't talk to those strangers. Don't, if people start harassing you, you just walk away. You look the other way. You don't engage them. And they think there's no survivable value to that. You're not, because you don't know. They don't know what to do. And so they don't have strategies, they don't have tactics, and they don't have the tools to allow their kids to create defensive strategies. Matter of fact, it was Gavin DeBecker, and I'm not going to try and paraphrase his exact quote, but the premise of his concept, or what he said, his statement was simply this: an adult who cannot create a safe environment for themselves has no fucking chance of creating a safe environment for their child. Right? And so meaning what? What are my safety strategies? How do I stay safe in this world? How would I handle a threat? How would I box around the threat? How would I make it so that violent predators, remember, predators have optics. They are walking around looking for criteria, typically 3 criteria that they're looking for that say, fuck, that's the victim. I'm the lion. Look at all the fucking gazelle. Okay, but we're not going to attack all the fucking gazelle. Which gazelles are we going to fucking attack? Right? And it's the ones that are isolated. It's the ones that are distracted. Or it's the ones that appear meek. They're going, what I mean? So something, this guy's 6'2", something fit their optics, or it was personal. It was something history. And that's probably why there were several of them. Because the paperboy doesn't ring your doorbell and ask you to step outside. A classic Paul Vunick line, right? One guy doesn't go up to the 6'2" guy, announce his intentions, and then start to fight him when he knows that probably the 6'2" guy is going to pick him up, bang him off his head. He has several guys, they bring knives, they ambush him, and they destroy you. So I don't want to drift too far off what my concept was, but what are the defensive strategies? Have those conversations. And here's the thing. If you don't know what the defensive strategies are, you don't know how to coach them. My first driving instructor was my dad. And he was really good at it. And yet he still, at a certain point, when I hit the limit of his ability to teach me, hired a professional driving coach, and I went to that person and then did their program, and then went and did the course and test. And of course, I passed first time on my 16th birthday, no problem, right? Not every parent, some parents go, I'm the last person that should teach you how to drive. Maybe they go, I'm a great driver, but I don't have a fucking clue how to teach you how to drive. I don't know how to communicate that. Find someone that does, hire somebody, or learn it. And that's really to me, that was just maybe what I thought we could get across in the first half of our podcast tonight. Was what was your reaction to this? And especially, I think I'm speaking to parents. This happened. And maybe you go, it's not my school, not my kid, not my kid's friends, not our circle of influence, not our circle of travel. So fuck it. It's tragic. I feel bad. And then I move forward. Your son, your daughter is in the same type of environment where this type of stuff happened and will happen again. And next time, it may be your school, it may be your son, it may be your daughter. So stop saying the unimaginable has happened. No, we have to start imagining. That's the problem with dealing with violence. With dealing any horrific crisis, the first problem you run into is you actually have to imagine. You have to entertain the nightmare. You have to own the problem. Before you can ever come to a solution, you have to acknowledge the existence and the harsh realities of it. So, I don't know, is there anything you want to throw in on that? And then I think we're going to move to the second hot topic here.
Yeah, no, I think violence is kind of going through the same thing that sex had to go through. Yeah. I'm sure if you go back, and I don't know what the years would be, but there was a time when sex wasn't talked about in school. There was no sex education in schools. They didn't talk about STDs and having protected sex and da 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 da. And I think that's kind of what violence now needs. I mean, that's why we're here right now.
Yep.
You know, we're trying to start that. We're trying to help people have that because it's not out there, and it needs to be. That's what violence needs to go through. Is people need permission to, like you said, accept the hard reality that it's out there, accept that it's okay to talk about it and it's okay to teach your kids about it, and then get the right coaching if you don't know what to tell them, what to do.
100%. 100%. Okay, we will revisit this again as more details come out. I think then we can have a more complete, comprehensive conversation. But I definitely wanted to at least acknowledge what this poor, young man went through, and obviously send our condolences. And it just reinforces our mission as a company, as people, as parents, on why we have to weaponize the world. Why we're so passionate about helping people understand and accept the realities of violence and learn to protect yourself and your family from violent criminals like this. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to move on to something that I didn't even know fucking existed. I had never heard of this. And was it yesterday morning? Maybe what is today? Thursday? Yeah, maybe it was Tuesday morning. I got a text message at like 6 a.m. from a family friend of ours, also someone who has trained with us numerous times, a young woman. And she sent me a video, and she's like, I can't stop thinking about this, and I want your opinion on it. And so I watched it, and at first I didn't even fucking understand. I mean, I thought it was a one-off, and then I did a little bit of research, and I figured out that there is a growing, I don't want to say underground because it's not underground, but a growing subsect of society and men that are jumping on this thing, this movement. And it's called an incel. And incels, they call themselves incels. Incels, as I came to learn, are men that describe themselves as involuntarily celibate. And they have a massive hatred towards women. And the gist of this, and I'm going to show a video here in a couple seconds. The gist of this is these are typically young men that have somehow in their perception, in their life experience thus far, feel rejected or unattractive to females. And this creates a tremendous fucking hostility in these men. And so not only is there these forums and chat groups where they are on there and they are, announcing women as the greatest fucking evil and the threats and calling them every thing you could possibly fucking imagine, the most vulgar things, degrading women and saying, women should be, wiped off the face of the earth, basically. They are taking to videotaping themselves, approaching women or groups of women randomly on the street, and videotaping themselves saying the most horrific, vulgar things to women, clearly in a baited attempt to get them to react to that, to see their reaction to it, to humiliate and degrade them and debase them and dehumanize them. And if they get a reaction, they are then often turning to violence against these women in almost a sick, twisted justification of like, oh, you do that to me, and they're pepper spraying them. And there has been at least 2 mass murders where the individuals that committed these mass killings, these mass murders, have claimed and tagged themselves and identified as incels. And so I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna share a video with you. And I think the video is about 2 minutes long, maybe just a little bit over 2 minutes long. I'm not going to narrate it. We could do an overlay, and I'm just going to let it play. And then we're going to come back and talk about it. Because I know many people are probably like me. They haven't seen this video. They were unfamiliar with this topic, but I want you to watch it. Now, I'm going to warn everybody. The whole goal of this fucking clown, this guy, this supposed man, is to say the most vulgar, horrific things in an attempt to get a reaction. And you need to watch to the end of it if you can watch it. But if you cannot stand the language, if you're sensitive to that stuff, give us about 2 minutes from the video starts and then rejoin us. Plug your ears or turn your volume down. And you'll still be able to see what happens at the end of it. But it's vulgar. And it's hard to listen to. But we need to, again, accept and take a look at the harsh realities of what's happening. So I'm going to cut to the video here. So again, here's your warning. If you're sensitive to that, please hit your mute. It'll be about 2 minutes, and we'll be back in a few seconds to talk about it.
Can I hang out with you?
My guy just stole my car, so he's there.
Where'd he go? Newport Coast? Huh? Can I hook up with you? What kind of vagina do you have? Is it an innie or an outie? Does it have beef curtains?
I'm gonna call the cops if you don't.
Yeah, fuck you.
Yeah.
You're annoying, dude.
Why are you following me?
Because I want to fuck.
Wait,
My fat ass cock is ready to get hard for
the
you.
cops are coming right
Why would you call the cops on me, bro? I'm just
Because-
speaking.
now. It doesn't matter.
Fuck you, you little bitch, you little void. Oh, you little. Whoa, what's wrong with you? Chill out, chill out, chill out. Hey,
Back the fuck up.
chill out,
Back the fuck up.
chill out,
Back the fuck up.
chill out. You just kicked me in the balls. You back up. You back up.
Back the fuck up.
You back up. Throw that at me, you're gonna.
You fucking.
Okay, so I'm just going to reset my mic here. I can hear it popping a little bit. Just give me a quick second here before we dive into this. Sorry about that. There we go. We should be back. Okay, the video was not as long as I remember. Like, I thought it was a little bit longer, but either way. So, again, when I saw this, I mean, clearly he's trying to get a reaction. And what he does to get his reaction is just say the most rude, inappropriate, aggressive. Like, there's an attempt to be completely vulgar, but you could see it. And there's a terminology that they're using, I guess, is when they do some of these videos and when they actually push to the point of trying to get some sort of reaction out of the women, then they're spraying them with the pepper spray, and they're actually calling, they label that something. I can't remember the term right now they're using, but so again, it's this whole movement thing, right? And this again is just one more specific threat. Like, this is a blueprint. And this again, just to make sure everyone's on the same page, this is why we teach what was called a bad guy blueprint. So the first thing that we have to do is we have to identify the type of criminal predator that we're dealing with. And there's typically two types of predators. There is what's called a power predator, and there is a persuasion predator. So the power predator uses their physical size, strength to blitz attack. Right? It's like they'll use that size and strength to overpower and dominate. And the second they have a moment of, so again, it's that scenario of like, you know, he's walking along, a woman passes him and he jumps out, grabs her and pulls her. You know, she's standing there and he just fucking punches her in the head or does something. So that power predator is this physical blitzing type attack. And they can either be organized or unorganized, meaning that there's a premeditated plan. Right? A predator that wants to kidnap a young child waits, and when he sees the child walk by, has the van door already open, grabs the child, throws him in the van, closes the door. So he blitz attacked the child. The van door was already open. The van was running, threw him in, took off. That was an organized blitzer. Then there's the persuasion predator, and the persuasion predator uses verbal. And they do things like forced teaming, niceness and kindness, typecasting, loan sharking. Okay, they discount the word no. There is, and so what I want to get to with this is the persuasion predator uses the verbal discourse most often to gain trust. And then, of course, when they gain the trust, they misuse that trust, and that's their leverage. That was the whole end state. And this is where you see in a lot of like date rape situations, right? Where it's like they are super nice and sweet and, oh, we should go on a date and all this type of stuff. And they do all these manipulation tactics to get the woman to say yes. And they go out. And then all of a sudden, it's like, oh, the second they got them alone and isolated because of the trust they've built, maybe over weeks or months, they groom them. You see it in pedophile cases. They groom the person. That's a persuasion type predator. In this video, what is very interesting is that there is a very power predator-esque feeling to it because they're very crass, overtly crass. Like, you know, you're not going to gain a woman's trust by right off the bat being so vulgar. So there's a power predator feeling to it, but what they were doing, or what at least on this video from my limited research so far, is they're typecasting. They're using words and they're using typecasting by saying, oh, look at you, you're a effing SLT, you know, you're a slut, you're this, you're that. Oh, look at those lips, look at this. Like some of the other videos I've seen, And that's what typecasting is. Typically, a persuasion predator would be like, hey, should we go on a date? And they're like, oh, no, you're that type of woman that smiles and flirts with a guy, but the second a guy wants to treat you to a nice meal, you turn into a cold-hearted bitch. I typecast you. So right away, the woman's like, well, I don't want to be, I'm not a bitch. Like right away, I'm not cold-hearted like that. And so you want to do the opposite of what the labeling or the typecasting is. And so in this, though, again, they're typecasting in a very aggressive way to get the response, a very power predator way. Now, Dustin, do you kind of agree, or what did you feel from the video, or do you agree with kind of my assessment so far?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I get the same feeling that it's got that power predator type approach to it. Like, it's done in a way where initially you almost think like, it's a bit of a persuasion predator, but it's not. You know what I mean? Other than like that one thing, like they're not the typical persuasion predator, if you can call it typical. But so yeah, I agree with you. It's a blend. It's kind of a blended approach, I think.
Yeah. Now I want to say this just when we're talking about, and again, this is very different in the sense, not very different, but it's different. The persuasion predator often uses niceness and charm. Like we have a whole program that we've been working on for a couple of years now that we want to launch here. That's just called Behind the Smile. Because again, it's not the boogeyman hiding behind the bush that grabs your daughter 9 out of 10 times. It's the Prince Charming that flashes him the smile and flirts with them and takes him to dinner and does all of this grooming to gain their trust. But they're actually using 7 different persuasion or influencing tactics, and most women aren't aware of those, to manipulate them into, doing stuff with them, connecting, building this like giving them the trust. So it's the con artist, right? Whereas this situation is again a typecasting blitz by a kind of a persuasion predator. But my point is this: recognizing when somebody wants something. And you have to recognize, like, when people are using, like, when persuasion predators are using niceness and charm and loan sharking and and forced teaming and discounting your no and all of these different things, it's because they want something. And what they want is control. And this is why it's so important for women, not just women, but men too. But women have to learn how to recognize when people are trying to gain control or like trying to influence you, because what they want is control. And in this situation, I want to clearly identify what these guys want. This guy wanted to pepper spray these women.
That's what I was going to say. It's like a bait and ambush, or it's a bait and then a power predator. Instead of just being a power predator, like with a blitz, there's a bait first.
Yes.
Right? Which makes it a little bit different.
Yes.
And you got to be able to recognize that bait. Like,
yeah.
Do you know what I mean? He's goading them because, like you said, he's not using the persuasion to try to get what he wants. He's not actually trying to pick them up.
He's not trying to get trust.
Yeah, he's not, which was what a persuasion predator would normally do. Yet he's using some of the same tactics. You know what I mean? But it's more of bait so that he can then become the blitzing power predator.
Yes. So what did he want? Most times, persuasion predators use one of the 7 or a combination of the 7 to gain your trust. Okay? Now remember, that can be an adult trying to gain the trust of parents to get access to the child. That can be a potential suitor or man that is interested in a woman trying to manipulate using the 7 or a combination of the 7 persuasion tactics to gain her trust. Okay? In this situation, he wasn't after trust. He was using the typecasting, but he wasn't after trust. He was after what? He was after the personal self. He was after the reaction.
Yep.
And I said something there. He was after the personal self. Now, there's 2 sides to all of us. There's the professional self and there's the personal self. And I want to caveat this, right? Because we do a tactical communication course, and in this it's called personal versus professional. But I want people to understand something. Words have fucking power. Words have done more damage, caused more wars, destroyed more lives than all of the bombs, bullets put together in every war put together. Because you got to understand, what's destroyed more relationships between mothers and daughters and fathers and sons and sisters and brothers and cousins and friends have been words. What started more wars between countries and religions have been words. People say shit to hurt people to get the reaction. And when there's the reaction, there's the emotional reaction. And so in this situation, he's using words, which are very powerful weapons, and he's using those words, he's typecasting, and he's wanting to push the buttons to get the personal self to come out to get the reaction. And then in his own twisted fucking mind, he actually feels justified in doing what he did. He said at one point there, why would you call the cops on me? I'm just saying words. I'm just saying words. There's no threat to you, even though he's basically standing right over top of him in a physically intimidating way. Even though he's kind of has that sick, twisted, smirky fucking laugh or tone to his voice. Can't see him, but you can kind of feel where he's at with that. Standing right over top of him, saying this shit because he knows these are just words. Why would you call the cops? I haven't done anything illegal. So why would you call the cops? But he's pushing the buttons, and that the girl at first said, there's a cop coming right there. Her whole demeanor was very professional. She was staying disconnected from what he was saying. Yet addressing it, there's a cop coming, I'm going to call the police. Why? It was only at a certain point when all of a sudden the reaction came out, the personal self came out, and her friend who was kind of lying down almost looked like, relaxing, tired, whatever, then kicked at him. And then she came up in the personal self, and he had now, and again, I'm not judging what she did. We're talking tactically. He got what he wanted. And in most situations, this is how it resonated for me in my own personal life. We are all very prone to having emotional reactions, especially when something so vulgar or heinous or so morally corrupt by our standards is being directed at us. Of course we're going to feel that. We're going to have an emotional reaction unless we can regulate that. And I had a very hard time of regulating my emotional reaction when somebody was debasing or dehumanizing me, even though it was just words. It wasn't a physical threat, but they were debasing and dehumanizing, especially in front of peers, family, or friends, right? Does that make sense so far? But what happened is I had a hard time controlling that. So I would be that guy to, what the fuck are you? You can't talk like, you want to kick him in the balls. Say, back the fuck up and leave us alone. Like, you've crossed the line and now that's it. Now I'm pissed. But that's a reaction and that's what he wanted. Understand, what changed it for me was when I recognized that they wanted something and that their behavior before they got what they wanted was manipulation. That was the game. That was the competition. They were literally manipulating me. And one of the worst things that we as human beings can experience is to be manipulated for evil, nefarious purposes by another human being. It's one of the most toxic things that we could ever experience, is to know somebody purposely manipulated you to hurt you physically, emotionally, or mentally and destroy you. And so the second I realized, now we back up, and what I want people to understand is what happens if one of these fuckers approaches you. What happens? Well, start off by recognizing I know what he wants. And what he wants, what he is trying desperately to manipulate you into, is a reaction. Now, I'm not saying that they all want this reaction. It might satisfy some of them just to say it and record it. That's what they got out of it. A sense of power. Look, they didn't, and I'm not saying you should say nothing and do nothing. I'm just saying that some of them could be satisfied by just going, watch this. Like the first woman in the parkade, where she really didn't say a whole lot. She just tried to keep walking away from him. Said, I'm going to call the cops, you need to keep. And he just kept hammering her. But again, she engaged him. He got a reaction, and he got it on camera. He was probably almost just as satisfied with that situation, with the first scenario, as he was with the second scenario when he finally got the pepper spray. And when he was running away, if you watch that again, when he was running away, and that second girl, you could see her, she was trying to hit him, whether they're friends or whatever, she just recognized what he did. She was trying to hit him. As he ran by, you could hear the canister being deployed again, meaning he pepper sprayed her as well. So in any battle, we can't win that if we don't understand what they want. Again, we got to own the problem. What are they after? Because they're going to try to manipulate us. And if we can recognize what they're after, we can now recognize the strategies and tactics of their manipulation and the tools of their manipulation. And therefore, now we can develop counter strategies for this. So I know that, and again, we're already at almost an hour, but The simple thing I could say right now is, if confronted with an individual like this, is we must understand what they want, regulate our body and mind, regulate our response, and we must stay within the professional self, meaning detached. Not emotionally dead, detached. There is the professional self. They don't know you. So again, it's like, I heard this thing, I think it was Selma Hayek that said it, and she, obviously she speaks Spanish, and she said, if I started yelling at you and saying every nasty word I could say in Spanish and yelling at you, and you don't speak Spanish, at some point, not only would you not get mad, but at some point you'd start to laugh, because you'd go, look at this raving lunatic frothing at the mouth, and I don't even understand it would become funny to you. But if you understood what I was saying, it's your perception and the meaning that you attach to that could then cause the buttons to get pushed and cause the personal self to come up. That bubbles up inside of you. And so we have to be able to understand, oh, this is one of these guys, and recognize there's a threat there, because you don't know where they might escalate to. Are they trying to get a reaction? They want a reaction. Do they want a reaction so they can pepper spray you? Do they want a reaction so they can punch you, grab you, stab you, shoot you? I don't know. We have to be prepared for all of that. But we must regulate our response, and immediately from that professional self, from that, here's the mission demands, here's the commands, what do I need to do? Everything I do is not about having an emotional reaction. Everything I need to do is about increasing my safety. Whether that's putting barriers between us, doing this, even our communication. How do we communicate? How do you do what we call a tactical response? How do you respond to that? Because if you say nothing, often silence encourages them. But if you say the wrong thing, you engage them. And now it just escalates on it. So what do we need to say? And of course, I don't have the time to go into that in this time frame, but maybe that's something we can do next week, where we can go through the tactical request and the tactical response and try to teach people the core concepts of what you should say. Because there is a way to handle this verbally that constantly moves you to where you want to be, which is increased safety, and does not engage them and doesn't give them traction. And so ultimately they spin out, they fizzle out, they burn out, and they go and find somebody else. They won't stop doing it. They'll just stop doing it to you. So is there anything you want to throw in on that part of it, Dustin?
Yeah, no, just I think, like, as you're saying to people, like, recognize what they want, and there's probably people out there who are going, like, well, how would I know? and you touched on it, like, well, how do we communicate, and all that stuff. And I think it's just hitting back on, like, it's the PINs, the pre-incident indicators, behavior, body language, interpersonal communication, which is exactly what you're talking about. You learn how to read each of those things, and that's, we call them PINs. Those are how you start to understand what this person wants. So just to sort of fill in that gap for people who are kind of like, well, where do you even start?
Yeah,
that's where.
Yeah, perfect. And again, notice how what we're talking about, our core center mass of weaponizing against violence, is not a combative technique. It's not a triangle choke. It's not the greatest triangle choke in the world. It's not the greatest guard, pull in the world. It's not the greatest punch in the world, the greatest kick in the world. It's got nothing to do with combatives. It has to do with mindset. It has to do with regulating your response. It has to do with recognizing threat cues, and it has to do with even communication, and it has to do with all kinds of different things that rapidly increase your safety, recognizing the blueprint, all this stuff, and only after all else has failed, yes, the strategies, tactics, and tools, the combatives is essential to be there. Right? But, we're trying to give people and show people that you have to think differently about violence and understanding the persuasion and power predators and their motivations, because it's a different thing. Go ahead, yeah.
One more thing I'll throw in there is everything you just talked about, like how the combatives is sort of that last piece of the puzzle. The nice thing for everybody out there, that's the thing where you can get very proficient at that very quick. But if you want to get like world class at that takes a long time. You want to get world class at the 80-90% of what comes first. Anybody can learn that very, very quickly.
100%.
Because it's not rocket science. It's just information, learning how to implement it, customize it if need be. But it's easy. It's easy to get good at this stuff, especially all that stuff that can make you infinitely safer before you ever have to take something physical.
100%. Yep, 100%. And yeah, and I guess my final thing with this is if in this short period of time, because we kind of divided into two different hot topics, in this short period of time, at the end of this, recognize that if you'd never heard of an incel, now you have. If you go, what the fuck is the point of this? What do these guys want? Right? They want that reaction. How are these guys going to do that? They're going to try to fucking typecast you. They're gonna be horrific. They're gonna be vulgar, but they're gonna typecast you because that plays on human psychology. When somebody says you're X, we want to, especially when the X is negative, you're X. I want to viscerally prove I'm Y, right? It pulls us into it. So you recognize that now. That's called the bad guy blueprint. You now have a blueprint. If somebody woke up tomorrow and was walking to work and this piece of shit individual approached you and started pulling this shit, you're already infinitely safer because your brain would go, one of these guys. I know, like you're already more familiar, which makes you more safer because you panic less when you're familiar. But imagine if you'd never heard of this, never seen this, and this individual come up and did this, you'd be like, what the like your brain would have a giant void. And the brain does not like a void. And you either would grossly overreact, grossly underreact, or you'd freeze. Either way, you're playing into what he wants. So they're manipulating you into a so-called victory for them, which means you're opening yourself up to potentially far greater damage, physically, mentally, or emotionally. So if anything, we've learned the blueprint, we've identified this, we've turned the light on to another darkness that exists, a way that a subsect of people, men, are targeting women. And this is what we need to know. We got to deal with the realities of what's out there, and go from there. So, anyways, okay, I think we'll wrap up tonight's conversation here. Lots more we could talk about on both of these subjects, and I'm sure that we'll revisit it. And now we've got more fuel for a couple things that we could talk about in the future on our tactical communication front and a few other different things. So we will do that. All right. So any final thoughts?
No, I'll leave it there.
Okay, perfect. All right, everybody. Listen, I want to thank you so much for joining us tonight or listening on the podcast. Your support is always appreciated. It helps us so much. Any feedback, as more and more people are giving us feedback and ideas and suggestions of conversations they'd like us to have, we love it. It really helps us make sure that we are delivering what you want to hear, what you need to hear, and adding the most value we possibly can. So please don't forget to like, follow, share, subscribe with anybody that you think this will add value to their life. And as always, please stay safe, stay weaponized, and we will chat again soon, everybody. Hey, thanks so much for listening. And listen, if you found this content valuable, here's 3 different ways that I can help you weaponize for free. First, grab a free copy of my ebook, The Education of a Weaponized Man. To get your free copy today, head to ebook.awakentheprotector.ca. Number 2, you can take a free workshop where you will discover the 10 insights violent criminals don't want you to know. To take this workshop, head to workshop.awakentheprotector.ca. The third way is to head to my website and check out all of my free-line programs that cover everything from mindset to strategies. To check us out, go to awakentheprotector.ca. And finally, leave a 5-star review so that we can reach more good people like you who are ready to weaponize and rise regardless.